Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Are you finding it harder to get motivated for things? Maybe not as interested in things that you were interested in before? Maybe not quite depressed, but also not yourself? I've always been one of those people who really gets into the holiday season. I've always celebrated Christmas my whole life, and New Year's has always been a really big deal for me. The idea of ending a year and starting a new one, of the promises and the possibilities, for me, that atmosphere always started right around the time that Halloween ended and went through the new year. I have always loved the end of the year. This year, I really had to force myself to get into any of the holiday spirit that I normally feel like I have. And this is something that I hear from a lot of people. Whether you celebrate a holiday in December or not, no matter what holiday it is in December that you celebrate, it is impossible, or I will say almost impossible, to live in our current world and not be surrounded by the idea of festivity and happiness and year-end and promise. The problem is this: we're currently living into our, for some people, third, definitely for most of us, second holiday season, end of the year season, when nothing is as it should be. Most of you who are watching this have had some sort of a big change happen in your lives in the last 2 years. So think about it for a minute. What big things have changed in your life in the last 2 years? Have you processed those changes? I always get that question.
What does it mean to process a change?
I'm going to explain this to you, but first we're going to talk about why it's important to do that. It's important to process the changes in your life because every change comes with grief and comes with promise. Sometimes a change is heavier on the grief, an ending, a breakup, someone passing away. Changes can come heavy on the grief, low on the promise. Changes can also come heavy on the promise and low on the grief, but it is not actually possible for someone who is thoroughly in touch with their emotions to have no grief over a significant change in your life. I have noticed that many people in my everyday life and that I've interacted with on this channel are feeling very similarly. So I want to normalize that for you. Right now, things are crazy. Right now, it's difficult to have conversations with or trust in people you've known your whole life because over the last couple of months or couple of years, sides of them have come out that you've never seen before. Maybe you have come to a realization about who you are as a person and you've shared that with people and they've either cut you off or you've had to cut them off because of the way they treated you when you shared your truth with them. I don't know what the circumstance is that brought you to this video, but I need you to understand that whatever it is, how you're feeling is okay. If you are feeling angry about the changes that have happened in your life, that's valid. Especially if you weren't the one that started those changes or if people's interaction with you due to those changes has caused distance. Those changes and that hope and that grief all exist together inside of you. If they never have, you may not have thoroughly processed that particular change. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that grief. Grief is a hard word. Grief is a word that people are reluctant sometimes to use because they liken their emotions to sadness and they'll think,
I can't use the word grief because someone else has had a bigger loss than me, and that's grief.
What I have is sadness and I need to get over it.
Or people who are grieving are looking at other people who are grieving and saying,
well, at least I didn't have their issue.
Or
at least this didn't happen to me.
Comparing our grief to everyone else's is always an equation for someone to lose. And when people are already losing and grieving, that's a terrible idea. Grief and hope can coexist together, but we do need to acknowledge both. My favorite example of this is a wedding. The people getting married could be so excited to start their lives and to move forward and to be whatever they weren't before they made that official, right? Great. But in order to start that new, there does have to be some ending of something. And whatever that is and whatever that looks like is different for every person. But to not acknowledge that there is some loss or some grieving or some change that something has to be let go of in order for that amazing, happy thing to happen for them, to me, that makes a celebration hollow. The messages we have out there about grief always seem so hopeless. It's
despair and it's forever and it's never ending.
And it can feel like that sometimes, but that is not all that it is. Grief is the acknowledgement that something has changed. Grief is the acknowledgement that something was important to you and that it is no longer in the same way that it used to be. If you have lost a relationship with someone, you can grieve that relationship and still know you're better off without them. If you have lost some idea of your identity or a job, or if the person you lost has actually gone forever from this world, in some ways the world gives more permission to that type of grief, but only for as long as the people around the grieving person feel comfortable with it. And any longer than that, and people are like,
has that been too long?
Are you sure they're okay?
The judgment of other people's grief, by the way, tends to come from our own discomfort with feeling our own grief. When someone is grieving and they come into your orbit, the people who have the hardest time with that are usually the people who are not in touch with their own grief and have not dealt with the things that they have grieved and the things that have gone on before them. And so seeing someone else dealing with it touches way too close to home and they want it to stop. They use terms like, well, at least da-da-da.
At least you had a happy life with them.
Or
at least they didn't suffer.
All of the at least things that we say to people, especially people who have loved ones who have died, all of those things are attempts to make ourselves feel better. Just a note, if you're tempted to use an at least statement to someone, be aware of the fact that all you're actually trying to do is make them feel better so you don't have to feel their pain. How to deal with this grief is different for everyone, but giving yourself time, giving yourself permission to feel what you feel and to encounter the things that you encounter in that is how you get to the other side of it. For myself, the most recent time that I had grief was not due to a death. It was due to the end of a very long professional relationship with a certain entity. That grief still stays with me sometimes, and it was about 2 years ago. And it doesn't even occur to me most days. It doesn't even actually show up most days anymore, but there are days that I could probably sit and cry about it for a while, or I'm mad still at people. And I'm telling you this to normalize the actual extent of grieving. It can take a while before all of the layers have been revealed. And it can take a while, even in that, for you to feel like it's okay to let them then heal. The grief of losing someone or something that is significant to you is important for your process. The place where grief becomes problematic is when it stops you on a regular basis from doing the things that you need to do for your life to run. Not all of the things. So for instance, if you're dealing with grief right now and you celebrate Christmas, the grief stopping you from decorating your house for Christmas, that's okay. The grief stopping you from getting out of your bed for months on end, it's not that it's not okay. It's that you may want to try to seek out some help professionally with a grief group or some sort of support that you can have with people who also are dealing with grief, who also are dealing with loss right now. The end of a year feels like we should be able to cap it off and head to the future. We cannot do that right now in the way our world is currently. That's not an option for us. If you are somebody who gets time off at the end of the year, it's almost not necessarily as celebratory because you've got to go back to the same old thing next year and nothing kind of feels like it changes right now, right? Because that's just where we are. But acknowledging that emotion, acknowledging how you feel about that and the losses that that hands you is what makes the difference between it piling on and it allowing you to move at your own pace through it. Grief is not meant to stop us from moving forward in our lives, but it will make it slower to move, and it is okay if it makes it slower to move. This is probably a good place that I should interject the reminder that if you are a person who needs to wait a little while after an event to actually process that grief, that's also actually pretty common. Not everybody deals with their grief right away. It's when you get back into your everyday life and you're like, oh dang, I don't have that thing anymore, or that person anymore, that relationship anymore, and now what do I do? That's when it starts to hit you. What do you do if you do end up feeling that grief and it does feel like that wave that's stopping you? First of all, make sure that you have people to talk to in your life. Make sure you have safe people who you can confide in and you can have those conversations with that'll listen. Just listen. And if someone's handing you at least statements, ask them to stop. Show them this video if you want to. Those statements aren't going to be helpful for you. Those people might not realize that yet. Also, give yourself permission to have your feelings and to have your process. Your process is valid because it's what's going to get you to your next whatever. Maybe you can't imagine what that next whatever is right now, but it's out there for you when you're ready to receive it. I'm a big believer in the idea that emotions are energy and energy can't just be stopped. It needs to be redirected. So if you have an emotion of missing someone or missing something, or you have an emotion of intense anger that's covering an intense sadness, finding a way to channel that that emotion into something else, a creative expression, a goodbye letter, a video that you put off into the ether somewhere on some YouTube channel and you hope someone picks it up somewhere. I don't know. Channeling that emotion into somewhere that it can go forward and dissipate from you, and the concentrated emotion it gives in you is going to help you to take a step forward. And it's a really valid way of dealing with your grief. That's it for today. Next week will be our last video of 2021, so we're gonna do some recap stats and we're gonna talk a little bit about where the channel's going in the future. Can't wait to see that. I hope that you tune in. If you wanna know a little bit more about how to survive the holidays with your families, check out this video. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.